Welcome back to the podcast from Responsible Raw Materials, where we explore the people, ideas, and innovations shaping the future of the resources that underpin our lives. And when we say raw materials, we don't just mean mining. We mean everything we take from the natural world to support society, from minerals and metals to food, fibre, energy, water, and the many resources that sustain much of modern life. Today's episode is a particularly enjoyable one for me because it's a conversation with someone I've known for more than 20 years. I'm joined by Pim, a geochemist originally from the Netherlands, whose career has taken him from childhood mineral collections and university laboratories to some of the most remote exploration camps in the Canadian Arctic, and ultimately into the worlds of data science, critical minerals, and resource stewardship. In fact, Pim and I first met on a nickel exploration project in northern Quebec, working in the tundra, travelling by helicopter, surrounded by caribou, Arctic foxes, and the occasional concern that a polar bear might just emerge from the mist. But this conversation isn't really about polar bears or even nickel. At its heart, it's about understanding resources better. We talk about how curiosity led Pim into geology and geochemistry, how a chance encounter with a mining company transformed into a 20-year international career, and how that journey exposed him to one of the biggest opportunities facing the resources sectors today. How do we make better use of the information we already have? From exploration and processing through to environmental management and mine closure, Pim has spent much of his career helping organisations understand how data can improve decision making across the entire life cycle of a project. And while many of the examples we discuss come from mining, the principles apply far more broadly. How do we understand the materials we depend upon? How do we make better decisions with finite resources? And how do we use technology and data to reduce waste, improve efficiency, and minimize environmental impacts? We also explore his current work, helping to understand Europe's critical mineral potential at a time when resource security has become an increasingly important global conversation. And finally, we look ahead. What might resource extraction look like 20 years from now? Could we move beyond some of the practices that have defined the industry for generations? And how can innovation help us meet society's needs while leaving a smaller footprint behind? It's a conversation about science, adventure, curiosity, and ultimately about how we become better stewards of the natural resources on which we all depend. I hope you enjoy it. So we're walking through the beautiful Barcelona evening sunshine. And the two of us who are walking here are myself, but also Pim van Geffen. Now, Pim, we first met in northern Quebec on an exploration camp where we were looking for nickel. But before we get to all of that, where are you from originally?
Yes, I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I'm actually based there right now again, after having lived in Canada for almost 20 years.
And what took you from the Netherlands to Canada?
Well, it was a fortuitous meeting with a mining company, Anglo American, when I was writing up my master's thesis in exploration geochemistry. And I told them I would love to work in that field. And then they said, well, we're looking for nickel in Canada. Perhaps you want to come over for a 6-month stint.
And that 6-month stint turned into a bit longer.
That's correct. Yes, 19 and a half years to be precise.
That is a long 6-month stint. But before exploration, geology, etc. So you studied geology in the Netherlands. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, actually, my career path started at a very young age, about kindergarten, when my mother would take me to these gem and mineral shows, and I was just really curious about how do these things form, these beautiful colors and shapes, and where do you find them?
And so did you know then that you could turn this into a career, or at what point in time did you realize, hang on, I can look at these amazing colors and shapes for a job?
Well, that sort of was in grade 11 when I was really into chemistry. I liked chemistry. I wanted to apply it somewhere meaningful. And then I learned that you could study geochemistry. And then I went to check out what it was all about. And it was about field work and about exploring the globe and doing lab work and going to remote places where you, as a tourist, would never go. So I was definitely sold right away on that concept.
So did you go traveling before you started to study geology, or is it something that kind of started together?
I was always interested in traveling. I didn't always have a traveling budget, but I was quite happy that the traveling expanded a lot once I started studying geology, geochemistry.
So it kind of helped.
Definitely helped, yes.
So you did your undergraduate in the Netherlands. Where did you do your master's degree?
Yes, my undergrad and masters were part of one integrated course at the time still at the Utrecht University. And the funny thing is that right now I'm working there next door, so 20 years after leaving, which is kind of a trippy experience. But so yeah, I did my undergrad and masters there, and I got support from a supervisor there, Simon Vriend, who had worked in exploration and he where had worked all over Africa with the UN, and he still had contacts to get me set up with wonderful field experiences in Nigeria and Botswana. So that's yeah, that's really what got me hooked onto pursuing a career in it.
Oh, well, he sounds like an amazing person who opened lots of doors for you, or certainly lots of opportunities.
Yes, yes, he was well connected, and he was also a good teacher. He didn't publish very much, so he wasn't that much like he didn't get the respect so much in the academic space. But personally, and I know the ones other students who've worked with him over time really appreciate his field knowledge and genuine field teaching all over Spain and France and other wonderful places.
So, when you got to the end of your master's, you mentioned there was a mining company called Anglo American who said, "Hey, do you want to come for a 6 month stint to Canada?" But how did you meet them in the first place?
So they came over to the university to give a company presentation. Rio Tinto was supposed to come too, but they canceled last minute. Then two Anglo guys showed up, John Landmark and Stuart McCracken, and we had a chat after lunch. And they said, "Oh well, send us your CV, and we'll have a chat with the geochemist." And then they said, "Oh, let's all go for dinner with a bunch of students." So that was amazing. And then the professor said, "Well, now you have to take them to the pub." So we did. But then at 1 in the morning, the gents from England were uh, wondering where the real party was. So we took them to a student club. That turned into a very late night. And then they we heard in the morning that they had missed their flight back to London. So that was a good start of my career.
I'm so sure that John and Stuart are going to love hearing this story in the podcast. This is brilliant. So, following that particular evening, you sent them your CV. I guess there were maybe a few conversations, and then you were what on a plane flying to Canada.
Well, what happened in the meantime was that Chris Oates called me up on my birthday and he said, "Happy birthday." And he says, "Can I come meet you in Utrecht?" And I said, "Well, I could come to London and meet you there." He's the chief geochemist at the time at Anglo American. And he said, no, he had heard good stories, so wanted to come check it out for himself.
He just wanted to go and party.
Exactly. Anyway, but that night wasn't such a wild party because our queen had just passed. So um, that, oh, so it's the queen mother that is
Yeah.
our former queen Juliana. Anyway, so Chris Oates actually he really believed in me coming from this random university in the Netherlands where mining is not really known to be the trade.
Mhm.
Um, and so he actually got me set up with this initial work in Canada that then sort of you know it started my career in the applied geoscience.
So, what was it that you were doing in Canada?
Well, as you know, we went up to the tundra in the Cape Smith Belt, also known as the Raglan Belt, where there was already an operating nickel mine, the Raglan mine, and we were a bit west of there, exploring for nickel deposits. So what we were actually doing was going around in the field every day by helicopter. We were stuck in a remote camp with 35 people or so, And every day the helicopter into the field and take as many soil samples as you could along grids and observe nature and get to know each other a little bit. That was a very wonderful experience. Just being in this remote space there, where there's still so much life. Also, so many birds, Arctic foxes, other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it was amazing, wasn't it? Because of the 34, 35 people who were there on that camp, we were two of the only non-Canadians, or certainly non-North Americans, I think, on the camp. So they thought that we were perfectly suited to be in the field every day together.
Yeah, some might have thought that. I think there were no major incidents, so yeah,
Well, we're
all
still
was well.
speaking now.
And we're still friends. That's right. Yes. No, so that was a wonderful experience. I think they also struggled a little bit where to put us because we were just parachuted in from the old continent, so to say.
Yeah, so that was something where I think from a cultural perspective, it was really interesting suddenly going from being in very different parts of the world, and then suddenly you were living in really close quarters and quite extreme conditions. So we were very reliant on one another for survival on that camp, and so it was really interesting, I think, the dynamics between different people, and also especially after a few months in the field, you sort of got to know one another pretty well.
That's correct. Yes. So, when you're in your 20s, you just, you sign up for the adventure and you just go. Especially, having done a few field trips before, you think like, okay, well, I'll be able to handle that. But you're right. Like after a while, the field sort of, you know, we didn't quite get bushed, but it is a completely different life that you live for months in a row in a remote space. That's very different from life at home, and you only really realize when you get back home how different it is.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember flying out from camp, and I flew through Boston to get to a conference, and I couldn't cross the road. I didn't know how to do it because I've been somewhere where there were no houses, there were no roads, there were no cars, weren't even any trees where we were working. But I don't. I think one of my abiding memories from that particular field season was the Northern Lights,
Yes.
and the fact that there were those moments where you could sort of drag your bed effectively out of your tent and
Hmm.
fall asleep
As we
underneath
did.
these amazing northern lights.
Exactly, and we did that, right? That was, yeah, like sky filling northern lights that was sort of like swirling around. That was magnificent. And I also remember one night that I happened to be out with one other colleague, um, just serendipitously, and it looked like someone had shot a flare, and there was
Mhm.
this bright, bright, bright streak through the sky. And so we ran back into the tent. It's like, well, I think that was a meteor. And I remember talking to you in field because you were considering doing your PhD, and then after a while you were considering not doing it on meteorite science. And I think it's also, well, even though you missed the live event, we still went outside, and then we heard a faint rumble as we heard the effect of that thing coming down, and it was a very exciting moment. So I'm just throwing the question back at you. What did you decide then?
Yeah, well, you've nailed it, Pim. You've shared the story as to why I decided not to stick with exploration and mining at that particular moment in time, and go and do that PhD in meteoritics. Because how often does a fireball come into land or kind of fragment within hearing distance, so we could feel and hear that supersonic boom, which is so unusual. It was absolutely amazing.
I believe I even asked you that in the week prior or so. I asked you like how often is that we actually witness something come down, like and how big are they? And you told me all about, oh yeah, but just most of them are just sand grain size and they burn up way before they hit the ground.
A shooting star is the
Yeah,
size of a
shooting
grain of
star.
sand.
Exactly. That thing. So I remember talking about it in the field and then actually witnessing it there was really special. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely amazing, and I think that um, that's one of the appeals in a way of exploration geology. I mean, I think certainly for me personally, I didn't go into exploration to to necessarily find minerals and metals so they could be dug out of the ground. I went into exploration because I saw the adventure and that opportunity to go to amazing places that otherwise you would never be able to have the privilege of seeing or existing inside of.
Not for the money.
As far as I remember that particular summer, I don't think I got paid anything.
No, I don't think people go into this business just for the money. Most people don't, and no, it's the adventure indeed, and the places you go, the places you would never get to as a tourist. That's and yeah, and then indeed spending real time there to really understand what's going on and to be present in that space. Yeah, it's a special privilege of our jobs. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one final question just before we move out of the tundra and maybe to Vancouver. But you mentioned life, and I have a distinct memory of sitting with you in the mist. So the mist had rolled in, which meant that the helicopter couldn't come and pick us up, and it was just the two of us sitting there in the field. And we were surrounded by caribou, and every so often there was we'd seen various foxes, for example, but there was always that fear of a polar bear.
Hmm.
And we knew that in other years there had been polar bears in this particular area. Um, but I think that was something that there's something strange about being in the mist or the fog. And you start seeing all these shapes round about, and that's where you have a true respect for the natural environment round about you.
That's correct. Yes, yes. And then especially when you know that help can't reach you, so you're stuck there. And I know there was a lot of philosophizing about what to do in case the polar bear showed up. And luckily, it just stayed with jokes that time. We were also not carrying rifles in the field. There was one in camp, but we only had bear bangers and bear spray, which apparently are not very useful for that level of of,
Of a hungry polar bear.
of
I
a
think
hungry
it was
polar bear.
more to season ourselves, wasn't it?
Exactly. That was a joke. The one joke was season yourself, just spray it all over you. And the other joke was, take your shovel and hit your partner in the knee and run. Um,
This is why I was the one that carried the sat phone, right?
right.
Pim is now
I
is
carried
now
the shovel.
Pim carried the shovel, but I had the sat phone. Anyway, the good news is we didn't encounter a polar bear,
Right.
or if we did, we were unaware of that. But it certainly, I think, yeah, that respect for nature and the living world, and knowing that we are a tiny part in that bigger system was a moment that certainly resonates in my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, okay, you didn't stay in the tundra. You were allowed to escape at some point in time, and you then went and spent a lot of time in Vancouver. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Well, first I spent about a year in Vancouver. Then I was offered a PhD position at Queen's. So I actually went to Ontario, cold Ontario, and I did my PhD there, and with Kurt Kaiser in the Isotope Lab. And then when I finished up in 2011, I couldn't wait to move back to the West Coast. So I did. So and then I ended up in Vancouver for about 14 years.
And you're still working at Anglo American at this point.
No, Anglo American did not have any jobs when I finished my PhD. So I got a job with Dave Lowy and Michelle Carey at then still IO Global, which later became Index.
And what were you doing there?
So there, I really got a very steep learning curve, steeper than it ever was during my formal education. So those first 2 years with iGlobal, I learned data analysis properly, and I learned everything that could be and can be wrong with data and will be wrong with data, and how to fix some of it, or at least what's in your control, and then to really understand how you can squeeze valuable information out of complex, large data sets. So that was really helpful. And then going around having to teach that stuff, that's the next level. Once you teach it, it first it's really intimidating because I didn't get particularly good grades in my second year university where I didn't see the application yet. But now here I was doing it and then also teaching it, and then you really learn the depths of things. So that really, yeah, that really helped me get confidence as a consultant to go out to companies and say we can really help you with your data.
So are you working all over the world at this point?
Essentially, yes, but mostly from my desk. I still got to go on trips to projects, but not every project that I worked on I got to actually visit,
Mhm.
which sometimes is a bit of a pity. But I did still get to travel lots of places and work with really interesting companies and people and projects at all stages of development and all levels of complexity. So Yeah, very good learning experience.
And so, from a geochemistry perspective, a data perspective, was that something that you applied all the way through the mining value chain? So, not just to exploration, all the way through into remediation, closure, etc.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thanks for setting me up. But that's what happened exactly when I started with IO Global. Dave Lowy sent me on the geomet course, geometallurgy, with John Van and a few others, and that was quite eye-opening to me because I thought that we'd be doing that everywhere already, that we'd be using, making use of all the exploration data and all its complexity to best predict processes downstream. So the mining, the processing, and even the environmental part, which I learned later when I joined CSA Global and then ERM. My ERM environmental scientists and environmental geochemist colleagues taught me that, they have a very similar problem to the metallurgist in trying to get a few representative samples that needed to be tested,
Mm.
and and how do you get those, and how are they representative, and how do you then translate the test work back into the block model? Because that was ultimately the goal, and we started really doing that in my last few years at ERM before I moved back to come on a European adventure.
Okay, so let's talk about that European adventure.
Yes, so at some point, things around me changed a little bit in the company, and then I always had in the back of my mind it would be fun if there was ever a job in my field in the Netherlands. And then just around that time, I did get a phone call from the head of the geological survey in the Netherlands, Tirza van Dalen, who I'd met at a geology reunion some years prior. And she says, well, the European Union wants to know what's in our ground in terms of critical minerals. And she said, we know everything about oil and gas and water and salt and stratigraphy, but we don't know anything about the mineral potential. Could you come help and set that up? So that was an amazing assignment. So I looked into it and discussed it with my partner and whether we should bring the kids across on
What,
this European
or
adventure.
leave them by themselves in Vancouver?
Well, or whether we should not go on such a big trip, because it meant going for at least a year to a different continent where the kids didn't speak the language and my wife either. So yeah, it's been an interesting experience. The first months were tough, but now we're in our second year and we really found our spots and enjoying it very much, actually.
And is it nice for you to be back in the Netherlands?
It is, yes, yes, for various reasons. So my folks are still in good shape, and so they get to spend time with the grandkids, and vice versa. I have three brothers who have their own kids, so spending time with the cousins, and also just professionally coming to a place right next to my old department in the Utrecht Science Campus, and working there with many people I still remember from my time at the university, and some others who work next door in the department as professors now. So it's been a really good experience. And then also just looking at the materials that are stored in the big core stores that we have through a different lens, because they were all collected for oil and gas exploration and production, and now we get to look at them from a critical minerals point of view, and that's a really interesting thing to then be allowed to lead. Yeah, so it's a very good experience.
So you mentioned earlier on that you were surprised by people not using data, for example, that are maybe being collected in exploration and then would be very useful later on. Is that kind of something that you're beginning to find now, or you're able to go back to those samples and, as you mentioned, look at them through a different lens, or maybe use more modern analytical techniques to try and understand them from different angles?
Yeah, it's a combination of those things. And it's also ultimately what I want to get back into is connecting the dots there, because exploration these days is such a data-rich environment that some people are overwhelmed by it. Luckily, we do have not just AI, but just the data tools to process the CPUs to really process large data sets. So we can do that now. it's just hard to keep up, asking the right questions, using the right tools to get to the answer. But going from that really data-rich environment and then taking just copper to build a block model, and around that block model, a mine, and predict how it's going to run for the next 20 or 30 years. That's such a poor way of proceeding. And if I were an investor, I would be challenging that. I would be asking, what are you doing with the rest of the data set?
So, from a, I guess, a responsibility perspective, how would you hope things improve over the next while?
Well, as I mentioned before, working with my environmental counterparts who had also studied geochemistry, but somehow we parted ways in year two. But we speak the same language, and then learning what the issues are around mining in general and all the environmental challenges and the permitting process and what you need to know to be able to make any kind of forecasts about how materials going to behave in the environment and what you can do about it, and then also think about mitigating actions. There is similar to the process that I just described for mining processing, to just be able to really understand material compositions and then understand how they will behave on a waste pile or in a tailings dam or in some other form in a given climate. Um, we can do that now. So we should be doing it, right? Because we should prevent all those problems that we've known historically and are still biting us.
So, why aren't we doing it?
Very good question. I think it's a cultural thing. Our industry is culturally a little bit conservative, and we're just we always challenge new developments. And while it's really good to challenge new ideas, because you can't just jump into every new idea and spend lots of money on developing something that's not going to work, um, it is important to see the value that you could get out of such an analysis. And side remark there is that in the exploration stages, the budgets usually don't allow for an advanced geomet program, which would benefit only really the later down the value chain. So if exploration department has to pay up front, then it's a big chunk out of their budget, where it would save many costs down the road. So I like to joke that if you ask any big mining company now what it's worth to them to get their legacy projects off the books, like what it's worth to you to say, you to be able to walk away from those projects, that they're no longer your liability. I think that's, we should turn that question around, and then I think people realize the value of doing this stuff.
So, it was just over 20 years ago. I think we were trying to dodge polar bears up there in northern Quebec. If we go forwards another 20 years, what do you hope the sector's going to look like?
Well, I think first things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. Working in the Netherlands on a critical materials assignment um, made me realize that the words critical and crisis actually have the same Greek root. And the previous two times that in the Netherlands was, we looked at a national program for understanding the mineral potential. The first report came out in 1918, and the second one in 1946. So I don't want to correlate extrapolate too far from 2 points. But that said, we're currently heading into a crisis, and all we can hope is that it's not as severe as those previous two times. But I think we're going to have to go through that crisis. Hopefully, we'll all survive and we'll be able to pick it up and realize that once we move into that post-crisis situation, that we do still have the tools and the knowledge to actually bring about these changes I was just talking about, because we now have not only much higher quality data, we have a lot more of it, and we have a lot more processing power. And with that, also the data science, as we actually just earlier talked about today, is coming to join us, to join forces and help us really leverage the early data-rich environment into the future of new projects. And another thing that I think is coming, that I'm also pushing for a little bit, is that we go away from conventional open cut or underground mines and more, as much as we can, towards in situ recovery of materials, so that we actually just drill down, we dissolve things underground that we need, extract them at surface, but then, the salt water goes back underground, and we leave all the other bits behind that we don't need, to put people out of harm's way, to preserve, to minimize our footprint at the surface, and minimize damage.
Well, Pim, I hope it's not going to be another 20 years before we have a proper chat. It's been lovely speaking with you this evening. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah.
So that was my conversation with Pim. And what I love about this discussion is that while it begins with geology and exploration, it ultimately becomes a conversation about something much bigger. How do we understand and manage the resources that support our lives? One of the themes that runs through the entire discussion is curiosity. The curiosity that led a child collecting minerals to become a geochemist. The curiosity that took him across continents and into some of the most remote places on Earth. And the curiosity that still drives him to ask difficult questions about how can we do things better. Because whether we're talking about minerals, water, agricultural systems, forest, fisheries, or energy resources, responsible resource management starts with understanding. Understanding what we have, understanding how those resources behave, and understanding the consequences of the decisions we make. One of the things that really struck me is Pim's observation that we often collect enormous amounts of information, but only use a fraction of it. And that's not just true in mining, it's true across many sectors. We gather data, measurements, observations, samples, monitoring results, but too often those pieces remain disconnected. And yet the real value often lies in connecting them. Connecting exploration with processing, connecting production with environmental outcomes, and connecting short-term decisions with long-term consequences. Ultimately, connecting different disciplines that have historically operated in isolation. Another aspect I found particularly interesting is the way Pim talks about responsibility. We often think about responsibility in terms of avoiding harm, reducing impacts, meeting regulations and complying with standards. And of course, all those things matter. But there's another side to responsibility. It's about using the knowledge we already possess. If we already have information that could help us predict environmental threats, improve recovery, reduce waste, or minimize future liabilities, then perhaps responsibility means making sure that information is actually used. Because responsible resource management isn't simply about collecting knowledge, it's about using it. The conversation also highlights something that has come up repeatedly throughout this podcast series: systems thinking. Resources don't exist in isolation. Mining doesn't exist in isolation, nor does agriculture or energy systems, water systems, or food systems. Everything is connected. And the more we understand those connections, the better positioned we are to make decisions that create value not only today, but for future generations as well. Finally, there's the future. And I find Pim's perspective both realistic and hopeful. Realistic because he recognises that we're entering a period of increasing pressure around resource security, critical minerals, and competing demands on natural systems. But hopeful because now we have tools that previous generations simply didn't possess. We have vastly more data, greater computing power, better analytical methods, and increasingly sophisticated ways of understanding complex systems. The challenge is no longer whether we can generate information. The challenge is whether we can bring together the science, technology, expertise, and collaboration needed to use it effectively. And perhaps the most exciting part of the conversation is the idea that future resource extraction may not have to look like the past. Whether that's through in situ recovery, improved processing methods, circular systems, or entirely new approaches that we haven't yet imagined, there's enormous potential to rethink how society obtains the materials it needs. not because we need fewer resources, but because we need to become better stewards of them. And that, ultimately, is what Responsible Raw Materials is all about. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Responsible Raw Materials brings together voices from across industry, academia, government, civil society, and beyond. These conversations include all aspects of raw materials, including minerals and metals, recycling and reuse, agriculture, forestry, fishing, energy, environment, infrastructure, and society, in each case exploring shared challenges as well as opportunities. We try to create the space for honest and open discussion, as it's through listening to and engaging with one another's true perspectives that new ideas can form and improvements made. To find out more and explore hundreds of videos, resources and links, all freely accessible, please go to www.responsiblerawmaterials.com.